sows and harvests. She feeds and tends her family's animals, collects fuel wood, carries water. She sells crops she grows. She shops and cooks. She funds her children's education, cleans house, takes care of the sick and elderly. Despite all of this, Amina has less access to assets, opportunities, and benefits than her husband, her brother, her father, or her son. Much less. This inequality hurts more than women and girls. It holds back whole communities and societies. If the world's women and men food producers had equal access to resources, yields would increase and everyone would have more and better food. The number of hungry people could be reduced by 150 million. If women and men had equal access to land, loans and learning, if the norms and policies that favor men today included women's preferences, realities and ambitions, together, men and women could transform lives and livelihoods. Join the CGIAR Gender Platform. Help us build and use evidence to make gender equality central to agriculture and our entire food system. Because when wives, sisters, mothers and daughters move forward on equal footing with their husbands, brothers, fathers and sons, both people and planet will be well and truly nourished, finally. Meet Amina. She's a farmer. She sows and harvests. She feeds and tends her family's animals, collects fuel wood, carries water. She sells crops she grows. She shops and cooks. She funds her children's education, cleans house, takes care of the sick and elderly. Despite all of this, Amina has less access to assets, opportunities, and benefits than her husband, her brother, her father, or her son. Much less. This inequality hurts more than women and girls. It holds back whole communities and societies. If the world's women and men food producers had equal access to resources, yields would increase and everyone would have more and better food. The number of hungry people could be reduced by 150 million. If women and men had equal access to land, loans and learning, if the norms and policies that favor men today included women's preferences, realities and ambitions, together, men and women could transform lives and livelihoods. Join the CGIAR Gender Platform. Help us build and use evidence to make gender equality central to agriculture and our entire food system. Because when wives, sisters, mothers and daughters move forward on equal footing with their husbands, brothers, fathers and sons, both people and planet will be well and truly nourished, finally.
Welcome and thank you for joining us for this side event happening on the margins of the 66th session of the Commission on the Status of Women. To start us off, I'll give some light housekeeping. This event is being recorded, and when entering the call, we advise that your name appears clearly. Please rename yourself using the rename function on the participants list. We also invite you to use the Q&A function to put any questions forward, and the host will be in direct contact with you. You will also have the option to raise your hand, and as of now, you will notice that you are muted. but we will activate your microphone if you're putting forward a question. As we want this session to be as interactive as possible, we also invite your engagement on social media. We are using the hashtag CSW66, the official CSW hashtag, and also Gender in Ag. In these COVID times, we are all used to video conferences and some of the common hiccups. Should they occur, please bear with us and we will restore order shortly. Please note that we have interpretation available for you for the French and Spanish speakers. My name is Vivian Atakos. I will be your host for this event, and I work on global engagement and policy with the CGIAR Gender Platform. It is our hope that today's session will provide information and links to resources available, inspire you to advocate for the empowerment of women and girls. We look forward to hearing from our speakers and to having a productive discussion. So first of all, to start us off, we are going to receive opening remarks from Her Excellency Ambassador Rabab Fatima, who is the permanent representative of the People's Republic of Bangladesh to the United Nations. Her remarks are going to be delivered via a pre-recorded video, but first I will introduce her formally. Ambassador Rabab Fatima was appointed permanent representative of Bangladesh to the United Nations in December 2009. She's currently president of the Executive Board of UN Women and chairperson of the UN Peace Building Commission. She is the first woman to hold this position. She's also facilitating the Progress Declaration for the first International Migration Review Forum to be held this year. Ambassador Rabab is also Vice President of the 76th session of the UN General Assembly. In her long diplomatic career, she has served in senior positions in the Commonwealth Secretariat and the International Organization for Migration. We welcome Ambassador Rabab to give her remarks at this point, and please engage with us via Twitter. Her social media handles are going to be posted in the chat box shortly. Welcome, Ambassador Rabab.
Madam Moderator, Excellencies, distinguished experts and panelists, and dear colleagues, we're delighted to partner with the Permanent Mission of Zambia to the United Nations and CGIAR Gender Platform to co-host this important side event. I thank the distinguished panelists and experts for joining us from across the regions. We are very grateful to have you with us today. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, climate change is an existential threat of our time. The sustainability of our food system is inextricably linked to our ability to tackle adverse impacts of climate change and ensure healthy ecosystems. Climate-induced severe weather, droughts, fires, floods, and cyclones are putting global food production at high risk. The IPCC Working Group 2's contribution to the 6th assessment report put a sharp spot on adaptation options, together with supportive public policies for reducing climate risk for the food systems. It is estimated that without effective adaptation, global yields of food production could decline by up to 30% by 2020, proportionately impacted by food insecurity and malnutrition. And those living in climate vulnerable or disaster-prone areas are far worse off. But on the other hand, women contribute immensely to sustainable consumption and production. There is ample evidence indicating that women are inherently better in adaptation and sustainable management of food within the household and community. According to FAO, if women had the same access to resources as men worldwide, they could grow 20 to 30% more food on the same amount of land, lifting 150 million people out of poverty and avoiding 2 billion tons of emissions between now and 2050. Therefore, investing in the empowerment of women and girls can have a transformative impact on the global food systems. Distinguished colleagues, allow me to highlight a few points. First, women and girls are an integral part of agriculture and spend a significant amount of time on food preparation. Yet they face structural barriers, which include lack of access to land, credit, education, and lesser or no role in decision making. Women own only 40% of agricultural land, while they constitute 43% of the workforce in agriculture. Over and above this, nearly 40% of the world's economies still limit women's property rights. To build a more sustainable food system, we must eradicate these discriminations and ensure women's equal access and rights to land and natural resources. Secondly, empowering women and girls in agriculture and food production would require equitable and effective use of science, technologies, and innovation. Women must have access to education and to the best available technologies to help them in sustainable farming and livestock management. Better access to information technologies will not only help women farmers with enhanced information and access to market, but can also save them from the rent-seeking and manipulative activities by the intermediaries. Equally important is to maximize designing time and labor-saving technologies and making them accessible to women. Efforts should also be made to formalize and monetize their work in the agriculture and food production sectors. Thirdly, women's full, equal, and meaningful participation in all policy discourses related to climate change, environment, natural disaster, and food security is critical. In Bangladesh, we have adopted gender-responsive policies and programs to tackle climate change and natural disasters. We are one of the first countries to adopt a climate change and gender action plan back in 2013. We have also adopted a national action plan on women, peace, and security, which prioritizes women's participation in disaster risk reduction. We wish to leverage on multilateral platforms to support our national efforts. There is a greater need for finance, as is the need for access to technology to strengthen the means of implementation of these policies. Finally, distinguished colleagues, we need multi-sectoral and innovative partnerships with governments, NGOs, civil society, and the private sector to develop equitable and gender-responsive food systems, which is imperative for our survival in the changing climate. The private sector must technologies to help women farmers and ensure women's equal participation in supply chain. At the same time, grassroots women's organizations need support and patronization from other experienced stakeholders to advance their advocacy for gender equality in agriculture. And today, rest it here, dear colleagues, and I thank everyone for their patient hearing. I look forward to a very productive discussion this morning. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Ambassador Fatima Rabab, for getting us started and for those welcome remarks. Indeed, you've given us solid examples even from the work that's going on in Bangladesh with the gender transformative approaches. So now, just to get this conversation moving, we are going to move on to the expert remarks. And we have two great speakers prepared just for you. But in the meantime, I appreciate every one of you that has gone into the chat box and you are already introducing yourself. I want to encourage the rest of us to introduce ourselves and also to rename ourselves with your useful names so that we can be able to know who you are. So at this point, I will introduce our first expert speaker, who's going to speak to us on where we want to go, research and policy directions. And this is Dr. Nicolene Dehan, the director of the CGIAR Gender Platform. Dr. Nicolene has over 20 years of expertise in gender, rural livelihoods, agriculture, and natural resource management. In her present position, she is responsible for leading the work on gender across 14 global agricultural research centers known as CG centers. Please feel free to be in touch with Dr. Dihan as she continues via Twitter, and my colleague will share her Twitter handles in the chat box. Dr. Dihan, over to you.
Thank you, Vivian, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Appreciate you taking the time to have our wonderful discussion today. Greetings from Nairobi, Kenya. I would first like to start to thank the permanent mission of Bangladesh and Zambia for being willing to help host this session. It's a very important session and we really appreciate their help. I would also like to thank Dr. Hook and Dr. Kalibata for taking the time to provide us with the keynotes. And thanks also for all the panelists for actually providing our experiences on the ground, which is also so important to keep us relevant when we are having these sessions. And thanks to all for attending, and I hope that there will be a nice and good conversations on the chat. We hope it will be an interesting session where we hope to set the tone for the rest of the week as CSW starts. And we hope to push some boundaries on what is needed to move the climate change and gender inequities into a better space. I will spend a few minutes talking about a few areas of interest to me, and I will do it in twos. So I will provide 2 entry points, 2 examples, and 2 options on how we move forward. CSW66 is bringing together 2 very important themes of our times. It's bringing together climate change and gender. And this is a fast and important field of work, but it can be so fast, we need to figure out where do we start. And so I would like to start by talking about how we can target or break down some of the issues and how we can, by breaking it down, then really start targeting where we need to work. And so I'll provide 2 lenses through which we can tackle this immense challenge: food systems and research. Both these areas are key to the work of the CGIAR Gender Platform, where we have a vision of our world in which gender equality drives transformation towards equitable, sustainable, productive, and climate resilient food systems through research. So what are the 2 entry points that we can actually combine these 2 of gender equity and gender equality and climate change? So the 2 entry points, like I mentioned, are food systems. So why food systems? Why not something else? Well, partly because the CGIAR is a group of agriculture researchers who do look at food system. But also why not? Because food systems are our closest relationship with nature and therefore with climate change. But as important, women make up 50% of the food system. So it would be stupid not to include women in this and figuring out how we can work with them. So in the work we do in food systems and gender, we're twofold. One is that we do know women make up 50%. So if they're already doing the labor, let's give them the tools to do it better and to do it good. So this is very important. They provide 20 to 80% of the labor. And if they're providing the labor, let's give them the tools to do it better. But at the same time, we would also like to see women as agents of change and being empowered through these food systems. So that's our 1 entry point as we go into this conversation. Then the second area that we find important is research. And why research? Well, very simple. Too much work on gender is emotive. And so we need to develop a better evidence base to understand the issues, but also to develop solutions that are inclusive and climate smart. We have already come a long way and know more than we did 20 years ago. We have made women visible. We talk about gender disaggregated data, whereas we before thought, well, as long as you interview a man, you know everything. But we appreciate that you also need to interview the few women in the household. We've also moved a long way and have developed the Women's Empowerment Agriculture Index, so we can start understanding how we're empowering women. So I think these are 2 very important lessons as we go into this session. How do we combine food systems and research? But then I would also like to give you 2 examples why it's important that we do it. And the 2 examples are 1 on water and 1 on hotspots. Historically, when you look at water, women have mostly been linked with domestic water. In other words, to ensure that they have enough to cook and clean. And that's what we worked on through WASH and all those issues. but I find that very stereotyping. So we've been trying to push that we actually give women access to productive water, water that allows to grow their own crops and use on their fields. But with climate change, this is being threatened. With the ongoing droughts, not only as here in Kenya, where we have an ongoing drought, but women now have to walk even further to get water. So there's no way that we're actually going to push that envelope of making sure they get productive water. So we're moving backwards in a lot of these things. So it's very important that we keep continuing the momentum in this area. The other one I want to talk about is called hotspots. We have recently embarked on research layering where women are involved in agriculture, where there are huge gender inequities, and where there are climate change hotspots. This will allow us to see and help target policy making into areas where we really need to look at how can we stop these inequities from growing. We have identified a range of countries and are now working with partners on ground to implement research projects to identify how can we halt these inequities. Both of these show that gender and climate change are important and that we do need to move forward with them. As you can see, the situation is dire. Climate change is having a large impact on gender inequities, and gender inequities are growing. And we all need to work towards solutions. So we need to get in front of the situation. So in conversations over the last few months, I've noticed that there are two ways of looking at the solutions. One is the long way to looking at the solution. We need to acknowledge that there is a problem, first of all, and we need to acknowledge that we need to change systems. So this is more long-term. Climate change is impacting women because the systems are not set up for them. They were not at the table when the problem was created and are not at the table yet to help solve it. So we need to start giving them a voice in all arenas and expect them to also show up in these arenas. Only then can we really change the system. But I appreciate that this is a long-term and it puts a lot of emphasis on women changing the system. So we do need to actually have something more short-term, because we can't wait for societies to change and for policies to be implemented. As we know, climate change is here and now. So we all need short-term solutions. So can we all get together and develop the best tools for women in food systems to deal with climate change? Not put them in as an added extra, as well, we'll just adjust technologies we have, but actually give women the technologies and the approaches and the resources they need to actually fulfill this. Can we work together with the irrigation specialists to tweak their systems? Can we work with the breeders to develop varieties that women want and that are drought resistant? Can we work with agronomists so that women can benefit from labor saving and climate smart technologies? Can we develop insurance systems that work for women? Can we start asking women how they are dealing with climate change on farm and in their business, and improve how they are doing this? So as I said, several sets of twos, 3 sets of twos coming up to 6, but I think there's a lot of work that we still need to do. And I appreciate everyone on this call, and I hope we can solve these problems. And thanks again. And I hand it over back to Vivian.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dihan, indeed, for the 3 sets of tools. Very useful. So now we will move forward, and we have in our midst Professor Salimul Haq, who is the Director, International Center for Climate Change and Development. He's also professor at the Independent University of Bangladesh, as well as associate of the International Institute on Environment and Development. Please note that Professor Haq was affiliated with the UN Food Systems Summit in 2021 as co-chair of Action Track 5 on building resilience to vulnerabilities, shocks, and stress. Welcome, Professor Haq, and as usual, the Twitter handles will be in your chat area for interaction.
Thank you very much, Vivian, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me and the 2 permanent missions of Bangladesh and Zambia and New York. I'm going to share 3 sets of remarks, each of which are very personal based on my own experience. The first one being the research that I do on adaptation to climate change. The second one being the country I live in Bangladesh, where I'm speaking from now. And the third one being the experience I had of chairing or co-chairing Action Track 5 on resilience of the Food System Summit under the leadership of Dr. Agnes Kalibata, who it's very nice to see again here. So the first set is my research. I've been working on adaptation to climate change in vulnerable communities, in vulnerable countries in Asia and Africa for more than 2 decades now. And one of the lessons that we have learned a lot, and this has actually been reiterated in a very strong manner by the Working Group 2 report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's 6th assessment report that came out just a few days ago. Firstly, impacts of climate change are happening. We're going to have to deal with them. We have to adapt at scale. We're not doing that. But an even more important element of the research that they cited, hundreds of papers, is that of the money that has been spent on adaptation, there is no good evidence that that is doing much very good. And in fact, there's some evidence that some of them is actually being maladaptive. They're making things worse, not better. That's a big sign. That's a big, big note for those of us who are doing research to be very wary about simply pouring more money into doing the wrong things is not going to make things better. So more money does not mean things are going to get better unless we change what we are doing. And I'll mention just one. There are many reasons for our failures, but I'll mention one very, very big one, which is that all the funds that have been spent so far, whether they be global or national, come with a international or top-down expert development paradigm. The expert comes and tells everybody what they have to do. Now, climate change is so brand new. There's no expert. Even I don't claim to be an expert, having worked on it for 20 years. It's a learning by doing process. You have to learn by doing. You don't know what is going to be done, what is going to work, what's not going to work. You have to test it. You have to see what works and see what doesn't work. And very often the most important learning is knowing what doesn't work, because if it doesn't work, don't do it again. If you keep on doing it, then you're wasting money. So if you make a mistake, the first time you make a mistake, that's not a waste of money, that's learning. But if you repeat the mistake, that's the waste of money. And that really is where we are right now. We are in the process of repeating mistakes that should not happen. And so one big issue in terms of this top-down approach is not valuing the knowledge base of the people, the communities themselves, and in particular, the knowledge base of women. That, I think, is one of the key findings of the research that has happened. People know a lot. They know their own hazards. They know how to deal with their own hazards. What they need is help to do better. And that's where we, the outsiders, whether we be researchers or we be funders or we be development agencies, have a role to play to build on their knowledge, not to tell them what to do based on our knowledge or our understanding, looking at maps and global assessments. And we come into a little village and we say, we know what's best for you. The people in the village know what's best for them, not us. And so we have to have humility. We have to understand them. We have to work with them, and particularly women, local women. That's a big, big lesson that we have learned. And I will re-emphasize it. And I tell this to anybody who's going to do anything. Talk to the women first and listen to them. And then decide what you think you can add value to. If you can't add value to them, then don't do anything, because you'll only make things worse. That's my number one message. My number two message is coming out of my country, Bangladesh, and we heard the description from the ambassador, permanent representative in New York, Ms. Rabab Fatima, of my country, Bangladesh. And I will cite Bangladesh as a good example of having invested in girls' education over the last 50 years. You know, we are just celebrating our 50th year as a country. We're a young country. But in this last 50 years, we have invested heavily in educating our girls in particular. And that has paid us a huge dividend in terms of our development pathway. Bangladesh used to be an extremely poor, extremely devastated country when we got our independence. In the last 5 decades, we have come out of poverty. We are on the way to becoming more resilient. We are also happen to be one of the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. But that is not putting us back. We are now tackling climate change at scale. And in fact, I would say Bangladesh has already become a world leader on what we call locally led adaptation, which is what I just said, is empowering the people themselves to do what they think is best, but as outsiders, supporting them to go to scale. And when we talk going to scale, we are talking millions of people now, millions. I'll just give you one example. In the low-lying coastal zone of Bangladesh, we have salinity intrusion from sea level rise and also from withdrawal of the water in the Ganges River in particular, and people having to drink salt water. If you and I were to go and visit there and drink the water that people are drinking, we will taste the salt in it. Now, a healthy human being can taste a little bit of salt. It doesn't do us any harm. But some people can't, particularly pregnant women. Pregnant women drinking salt water are prone to hypertension and then preeclampsia at childbirth. And this has been very well documented by scientists and doctors who are studying that. Now, if you now go to visit that part of the country, you will see millions of houses on the rooftops have what we call rainwater harvesting devices. They collect the rainwater during the monsoon period in tanks on top of their houses. These are just done by the people themselves, particularly the women, and they use that water for drinking only, not for other purposes. They can use the normal water for other purposes, but for drinking only, they can use it during the dry season when they have to drink the other water, which is saline. And this is now going to scale, and this is the people themselves. They know what to do. They go and buy the device, they put it up on top of their roof, and they collect rainwater, and they have fresh drinking water themselves. Now, some NGOs have been involved in this, the government has been doing it, but it's people themselves who have done it at scale. And when I say scale, I mean tens of millions of households, primarily the women in the households who have gone and done this already. And so, to me, the aspect of dealing with the issue of climate change and the problems that we have heard about the inequalities of women in general and the vulnerability to climate change is something we've known for a long time. We need to segue into solutions, into the solution space. And the work that I do now, my center does, is all about solutions. We don't talk about the problem anymore. We've talked about the problem for the last decade or more. No need to talk more. Is need to do things, do more, do them. And my final set of activities, therefore, are going to be on where we invest. And again, I'm speaking from personal experience. I'm a teacher. I'm a professor in a university. I teach young people. My young students, majority girls, by the way, are as bright and as energetic and as enthusiastic as any young anywhere in the world. And that's the future. Investing in them, investing in their education, investing in empowering them to become the leaders of tomorrow, to become the champions of tomorrow, whether they're working in the food system, in agriculture, in entrepreneurship, in jobs, in becoming a diplomat like Rabab Fatima, becoming a prime minister like the prime minister of my country, everywhere. They should be everywhere. They should be empowered to be everywhere. And empowering the girls of today to become the leaders of tomorrow, to me, is the #1 solution that will give us the biggest dividend in the next decade. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hack. Indeed, solid solutions, indeed, things that you have actually seen working. And I like what you said, especially that we have done enough talking. It's now time to do more. Thank you so much for the expert remarks. Now I'll move us on because we are ready to hear the keynote address. And we are privileged that we have today in our midst Dr. Agnes Kalibata, who's going to speak on women and girls empowerment in a changing climate, progress to date. So she is president of the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. Prior to joining AGRA, she was Rwanda's Minister of Agriculture and Animal Resources. So Dr. Kalibata served as former special envoy for the Food System Summit, the one that happened last year. And we are so happy to have you with us again. You are a friend of the Gender Platform and of the CG, and it's always a pleasure to hear you and to see you. Welcome, Dr. Kalibata.
Sorry, thank you, Vivian. You probably, one of the only things you forgot is to mention that I started off in the CGIAR, even as a research assistant, but I actually did.
Yes.
Very good. It's good to be with you all, and it's really good to see you, Professor Salim. And it's going to be very difficult to come after such a passionate conversation and discussion. But let me just maybe take the same tone as you did, Professor Salim, and just mention that I want to look at the Food Systems Summit and what it brought us. I'll bring in an African perspective. And then I want to really zero in into the work of the scientific group and the gender, the lever of change of gender that we had at the Food Systems Summit and what we learned from that. And in those cases, I'll be giving different examples as we go. So, I mean, it feels a bit boring, but we cannot start by not calling out where we are at from a climate change perspective, why the Food Systems Summit in the first place, the fact that the Secretary General thought that we may have figured out to feed ourselves, producing 50% more food in fact, 5 times more food than we produced 50 years ago. But we still have so much inequity in our systems. We still have so many people that go to bed hungry, but also we are destroying our environment in that process of trying to produce food basically at any cost. So he thought that the best thing then is to think about a food system summit that addresses all these intricate and very connected challenges. The challenge of nutrition and the fact that we are not eating well. The challenge of equity and the fact that we see a lot of inequity in our food system, especially COVID highlighted that irrespective of anywhere in the world, those inequities are something that we all live with. And then of course, the challenge that we are contributing to climate change, knowing full well that our food system is part of the problem, contributing more than 30% to climate change. So, and of course, as someone who comes from Africa, the thing that really drives me nuts is the fact that we are now seeing a decline in the progress we had started to make. You know, when you work in the agricultural sector in Africa, you're always hoping for that positive signal. And just to see that when that positive signal is beginning to come, everything's beginning to look up, you start another downward curve, which is getting a little bit steeper than we had all expected with all the challenges, climate change, COVID-19, and now the Ukraine challenge. I don't know what else is going to come. But from an African context, one of the reasons I joined the Food Systems Summit was also to help build that interest and that level of consciousness. And I'm just really happy to say that we had 49 African countries step forward. We had an African common position, meaning the continent really did take this seriously. But that is really driving on the back of the fact that climate change had already, and then of course COVID immediately after it, had already probably built a certain level of consciousness that made people want to do so much more. So we did see a lot of countries participate in dialogues. We did see a lot of countries step forward with pathways. And what is remaining now is how we translate those pathways into strategies that actually do incorporate the inequities that we see in our system on gender, on smallholder farmers, and other things that are extremely important, and including, of course, indigenous people, things that we always don't talk about a lot. So yeah, again, it is no accident that Africa was that interested. I just want to call out the recently published IPCC report. Again, talking about climate change would not be right without calling out this report. And for me, what stood out in that report is that it also does definitely call out the inequities. And it does go back to the fact that women are going to have to work longer to find water, and Professor Salim mentioned that. Women are going to have to make choices on what to put on the table. We already knew that, but it's getting worse. What do you feed your children, and whether you're going to be part of the eating or whether you have to hold on off on that meal? We already know that was going on because of COVID. And of course, the disease burden will continue increasing. And as it increases, women, the caregivers of our families, it's their time that gets burdened the most, but also because it's a huge challenge to see their families in those type of situation. So one of the things that I keep asking myself is, when you look at this type of report that really draws out some of the biggest, some of the best in terms of information, I ask myself, are women voices strong enough? Are we coming through in terms of the IPCC report? And indeed, I was meaning to mention that later, but indeed, even research itself, our scientific group did show that interventions that are covering women are not, that are meant to impact women are not covered enough across the board for us to have enough ideas on how to conclude and how to decide how to go forward, but also on how to use them across the board. So we will need to do a lot more in terms of raising women voices, but also in terms of increasing the research that affects women. Now, I just wanted to call out that the CGIAR has come out, the CGIAR research program on climate change, agriculture and food security does call out the importance and the need of technologies to harness, to advance rural women and their engagement in managing climate change. They do call out the role of data and how to access markets and how to access financial services, how to access information that farmers can use to plant, harvest, all that stuff is available there. But this will be defined by one thing. It will be defined by access. With these women, actually, are these women in places where they are able to access such technologies so that they can be able to change their lives. Tools like this are extremely important and are extremely important to support women's adaptation to climate change, women's absorptive capacity, women's transformative capacity, the ability to reduce risk, the ability to foster recovery from shocks and events, but they will only be useful if women can access them. If our food system do not address some of the inequities that prevent women from accessing these technologies, then we will actually be reinforcing and deepening the inequities that we've been talking about. And this is something that we have to pay attention to from a research perspective, from a policy perspective, and from an investment perspective. We cannot, going forward, not pay attention to how we invest to ensure that these inequities don't get deeper. I just want to highlight a few things that we are called out by the scientific group and the gender lever of change of the Food System Summit. The issue of cultural norms and expectations and the role they have in impacting women's ability to overcome shocks from climate change. But in here, I specifically want to focus, of course, because I'm talking from the African continent, on the fact that this is probably one of the things that has impacted the girl child, right? In terms of how they especially access to education. And today we are very lucky with the universal access to education in many places. But in its absence, in absence of sufficient education, the whole idea of early marriages and abuse in marriages is reinforced, is completely reinforced. They also called out the whole thing around technology access and the fact that men and women have different levels of access to information and technologies, especially with regards to communication strategies, to ensure that information and dissemination of information is adequately targeted to women. So if we don't do that, you find that there are disparities in technological adaptation and use that definitely are reflected in what the permanent representative of Bangladesh was saying, where the production gap is 30% or more because women are not accessing the right technologies. But also it impacts on the type of nutrition and health outcome that we get at household level. We have a very good example there, working with Harvest Plus, which is a CGIAR institution. AGRO has actually been facilitating the access to biofortified technologies in Malawi and other countries hit by climate change. The other part that was called out is decision-making. The ability of women to have, to be able to be in the place where they can make decisions around the nutrition of their children, the well-being, the resilience outcome that they need to have to strengthen their livelihoods. This is not necessarily given, yet there's evidence that when women participate, when women have that ability to engage in decision-making, they definitely influence how technologies are adopted. And let me give you an example. When women are given a chance to be part of this whole thing, probably the best place to see this is Rwanda, where giving women not just the decision-making authority, but the power of ownership that comes with the ability to own land, with the ability to participate in conversations, with the ability to know that they have a secured place in the workplace. That's actually changed the dynamics around how women participate. So many of you have heard of the fact that the Rwandan women are more than 50% in parliament. And how does this happen? I mean, you give them the 30% and you teach them how to get the other 30%, and they will definitely go after the other 30%. That's what Rwanda has demonstrated, that when you teach women how to get the other 30%, they will definitely get it. Women need voice and institutional support. Again, any marginalized group out there will need a whole lot of institutional support, and strengthening institutions and the capability of institutions to ensure that technologies are designed with the thinking of the challenges that women, I think, are going through. And Salim talked about it. Ask the women, ask them, design programs with their views in mind. This has already been brought out. I will not go a lot into it. I want to end this conversation with the economic empowerment of women. Women in business are disproportionately affected by the whole thing of access to finance and credit available to them. They don't have the same options as men have. And yet their ability to earn incomes and participate in activities that help them earn incomes is part of how you overcome some of the norms that I talked about, the gender restrictive norms that I talked about. So you will see that, for example, in Bangladesh, which Salim was talking about, the lack of credit access and most significantly impacts women's ability to participate in training, in accessing. I mean, the lack of training, the lack of appropriate interest rates, the lack of access to land does affect how they access finance, but also how they use improved technologies. So supporting women in entrepreneurship is an extremely important area that needs to be focused on, especially when the businesses are small, especially when the businesses are home-based and they need to grow. In Agra in particular, just to give you an example as I conclude, we've acquired a business called Value for Her, which is a platform, a digital platform that has over 3,000 women entrepreneurs. And the reason we thought that this would be important, first of all, was we did this during COVID. It was extremely important to create a platform where women businesses can meet and discuss the challenges that they were facing as their businesses were being challenged by COVID-19. But beyond that, it's an opportunity to identify the training challenges. It's an opportunity to identify the business challenges they are going through. It's an opportunity to create an advocacy voice that they can together take to banks and other people that can fund them. And it's an opportunity to ensure that some of the challenges that they deal with, including the norms we're talking about, are dealt with. If a woman goes to a platform and the husband is wondering what she's doing half the time and gets visibility of the fact that she's actually talking to women entrepreneurs that are making a difference in the world, it completely makes a whole lot of difference for some of these women. So we are extremely encouraged and extremely proud of the Value for Her platform because it has given women a completely new platform on how women businesses, a completely new platform on how to engage. So I want to conclude these remarks by thanking the CGIAR for putting this event together, by encouraging you to ensure that you as you get out into research into this work, collecting evidence regarding gender across different interventions, public or private, ensuring that will ensure that policies and plans for investment and follow-up on accountability do come through on gender outcomes. And we do know that this is a gap that was identified by the scientific group. And I would encourage you to ensure that you go after it and ensure that we become more focused and more effective in how we implement gender programs. So thank you again for having me, and I wish you good meetings.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Kalibata. Indeed, always a pleasure to have you. You have raised key points that we need to follow through, including whether women's voice are really being heard, and the main areas that we need to focus on. So thank you so much for your keynote address. And to the rest of us, I encourage you to make use of our experts, because we have a Q&A part just in your screen. Please type in your questions and our experts will be able to get to them. So now we are moving to another exciting part of this conversation, where we get to hear from experts in the field, or rather those who are down and working on the ground with these women and girls that we are talking about. And before me, you will see three of our distinguished speakers. We have Beatrice Firi, who served as Climate Change Ambassador under UNICEF Zambia Unite for Climate program. We also have Ms. Runa Han, founder of Friendship, an international social purpose organization established in 2002. And we have with us also Dr. Ranjita Paskar from the CGIAR Gender Platform, and also with the International Rights Research Institute. Her research is focused on mobilizing science and knowledge for innovation. So welcome to the three of you. You are looking good. And I do acknowledge that Ms. Runa, you have to leave us quite shortly. So no worries, we'll try to get as much as we can from you. So let's get to our question. I'll start off with Ms. Runa Han. What specific programs are you implementing in your country? And by that, I know that's Bangladesh, to empower women and girls to become more resilient to climate change. You are muted. Sorry about that.
My apologies. I will start with a bit of a context. So for 20 years, I have been working in areas which I found to be the most unaddressed, in Bangladesh. And this was not one or two communities, this was in millions, islands which were breaking and being made. Cyclones, breaking through the embankments and washing, in inland, taking away the sweet soil and making it all into saline. I saw the impacts on these communities. And 20 years ago, when climate change was really not so much in fashion, we have had Dr. Salimul Haq from Bangladesh, who has spoken, has given the context very well, and our ambassador, Mrs. Fatima, who has also given what, on the whole, Bangladesh is doing and what Bangladesh is facing. So if we zero in on the context in which friendship works, so we work addressing 7 million people with direct service access every year. Now, so this is in a country of 170 million. So it's not all that much, but it's quite relevant because all 100% of our core work are in areas where there is migration and climate impact. So starting from there, when we see that what it is that interventions are needed, the right thing at the right time, in the right place, in the right amount needs to be given. And this absolutely is essential, because when a person loses everything and is standing with nothing but what they have got, when they have migrated into an area they know nothing about, you need to ensure that your actions do not create any bad synergies around. We have heard this already, but this is so deep that we need to ensure that these people have a platform and not quicksand on which they stand. When you have nothing, what do you need? First, you need to be saved from fear. And this is evident in the faces and in the reactions and ability of the people who have migrated. Then you need to ensure that you are saving lives. Saving lives means that you work with health, you work with food, you work with security in every way possible. Then comes poverty alleviation, because if you do not make them stand on their feet, you have not empowered them to ensure that they can continue their life when you are not there. And I would like to share a little video to show you the context, and you will immediately understand our work and what we are doing. If we could share that, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Han, as you get the video up.
Thank you very much. So I'll continue as you get the video up. So we have please get the video up and I'll stop. Because, it's a 20-year of experience of ensuring that every life that we touch is left better than what we have left, what we have found them, how we have found them. And hence, you will see from the work that it is a kind of a synergetic effect which is created. And this is the context and a reality. Thank you. I just need one more minute. And it is that, that platform that you create, you need to ensure that what we take for granted in our lives, health, education, access to finance, access to what the government is offering, all these are part of their empowerment. And unless you can provide this link, you have a spiral which goes downwards. And this needs to be done ensuring dignity and self-respect.
Great. Thank you for those insights. The right interventions at the right time for the right people. Beatrice, if I can come to you, I can see you looking nice. And we want to hear from you about specific programs that you might be implementing in your country with women and girls to address climate change. Unmute, please.
Thank you so much, Vivian. And okay, I'm unmuted now.
Yes, you are.
All right. Thank you so much, Vivian. It's actually a pleasure for me to be one of the speakers for this particular event. And so, like you mentioned, I'm actually founder of Friends of Nature, which is an environmental organization based in Guinea. And so it's actually just been in existence for a year now. And so far, we've actually trained 20 young people as climate change activists. And this is just because, as you might be aware, Guinea is like one of the countries that is first seeing huge impacts of climate change. And yet there's really been little participation from the citizenry. And so why we are training the young people is because we believe that these young people are the leaders of today, just like other past speakers have also kept mentioning about this. And we also ensure that we train an equal number of girls as well as boys, because
are we losing Miss Firi? Possibly, yes. And I see someone asking about Zambia and Guinea. Yes, she is. She's worked in Zambia and also in Guinea. We'll come back to her shortly. Ranjita, maybe we can move to you and just hear about some of the programs that you have been implementing from your research. Over to you.
Thanks, Vivian. So I'm speaking on behalf of CGIAR, and then I'll focus a little bit on Asia here. As Dr. Kalibata said, access to technologies and other services is really important to women, but together with efforts to enhance their agency, voice, and participation of women. And as Nicolene said, empowering them to be agents of change and not just passive recipients of technologies. So the programs that CGIAR has been implementing it in India and beyond have mainly focused on these issues. Like, for example, in India, we've been promoting the concept of climate smart villages. which help address climatic risks, both from technological and social perspectives. So we are talking about providing gender inclusive training to farming communities so that, they can scale up demand-driven, climate-smart agricultural technologies and practices. Consequently, a state in India, the government of the state of Bihar, decided to implement this, climate smart villages and climate smart agriculture in all districts of Bihar. It is one of the largest states in India. And another important effort has been to provide climate smart, or what we generally call stress tolerant crop or varieties and management practices to women and other vulnerable socioeconomic groups, specifically targeting them and working mainly through women's collectives like self-help groups and farmer organizations. Another initiative I can talk about in 3 Southeast Asian countries, but also implemented in India as a part of some of the programs, is enabling women and men from ethnic minority groups to co-develop, design, time, and format agro advisories. So climate information, weather forecasts are provided to them, and they actually develop these agro advisories in a participatory manner in ways that are relevant to them, that are impactful to them. So I think that I would say are some of the main programs, but combined with this are also training programs which have been developed on gender, climate change, and food security. Several trainers have been trained, particularly focusing on elected women leaders in the same Bihar state of India, happening in other places as well. And then also focused on women cooperative groups in Nepal. And these people have in turn trained a number of others in the communities using what they have learned from those workshops. So yeah, let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjita. Indeed, the climate smart villages aspect and just bringing in the gender aspects is actually quite a good example of that. Thank you for that. Beatrice, I'll come back to you shortly. Well, I was going to give the opportunity to Miss Runa, but probably she needs to run. Do you have a moment? Or
yes.
Okay,
you stay for another friend. Please go ahead.
Okay, I'll give you a minute. Probably we'll come back to you, Beatrice. Sorry, we lost you. So, Runa, maybe we can hear from the programs that you are implementing in Bangladesh.
Yes.
What interventions have been most successful? Maybe just take a minute or so.
Yes, we create micro social entrepreneurs. Whatever work we are doing in health, we have hundreds of women who are micro social entrepreneurs who actually would not even take out their veils, are today called village doctors, So we train them in hundreds, and they're all part of the government system. Everything that we touch, for example, the teachers that we are training, flood volunteers. Molida last floods saved 45 women and children with a raft, during the rainy, when the floods came in. Micro-social entrepreneurs are being done at the field. We have made farmer clubs, where women are taking the lead in exchanging their voices and providing, training to each other. Paralegals, hundreds and thousands of cases where paralegals are connecting our hidden social issues, dowry, some things which pull people down in the rungs, and make them go down in the poverty level, taking them and pulling them into the mainstream system of justice. So you see, everything that we do is the micro-social entrepreneurs who are able to take their lives in their hand and link them up to the government so that they know where they stand in their, socio-economical and political ecosystem. I think this has been, all our programs are linked to this. And of course, there is always that case of that lives that you save, a person who can see when they couldn't, a child who can walk and she couldn't walk before. And, a fistula, a woman is ostracized and you do half an hour operation, which we are doing, and she lives her life again. Every single life that you touch, it matters. And right from the global to the one, all are important.
Well, what can I say? But just to reiterate the comments of Fraser in the chat box, that is really great work. And I do believe we can let you go at this point. But you can, yeah, thank you so much. So I'll now come back to Beatrice because we lost you at some point, but let me just give you 1 minute so that you can wrap up on the example you are sharing us with, and then delve right into the most successful intervention you have implemented. Over to you.
Thank you so much. And apologies, my network keeps breaking down. And so like I was saying, so at Friends of Nature, we basically believe in giving equal training opportunities around climate change to girls and boys. And so now what we're actually focusing on is that we want to also ensure that majority of the girls get an opportunity to be the voices of their community by ensuring that we provide them with climate resilient information. You know, most girls, when we were training them, they had totally no idea of what climate change was or what climate change is, and most of them thought that these are just issues that they're supposed to be affected by on a daily basis. For example, like most communities here are highly affected by poor water and sanitation, and these are issues that they think that they should actually just go through. And when there's a crisis of water, the girls have to stay back to take care of their households, and the boys have to go to school. So we are trying by all means to ensure that we give them resilient information. And so we've worked with quite a number of schools already, and this has proven to be quite effective. And also we are trying to do door-to-door sensitization for women to also get them to realize that women are quite key in implementing certain decisions in their communities, and therefore they need to be involved. They need to be to ensure that they are part of the leaders of change. And so that's basically what we are trying to do. And on Saturday, this past Saturday, we're also just talking to the women and getting their experience. And it's so sad to hear that most of the women feel that they do not have a space or they do not have a platform to be part of such kind of decision making. And so these are some of the stereotypes that we are trying to break as an organization, and also ensure that the ones that are coming behind, which are the girls, take up the spaces and also try to talk to their mothers as well as to their female guardians. So basically that's what we are doing.
Great, thank you. And just off the cuff, what ages are we talking about when we are especially for the women and girls that you work with?
Okay, so we are working with the girls from between the ages of 14 to 24, and then we are considering the women as those from the age of 25 and above. So those are the ages that we are currently working with.
Great, thank you so much. Ranjita, let me come to you. You may comment on the age question, but also let's hear about the most successful interventions that you have implemented.
Thanks, Vivian. I will hold my comment back on the age question, but okay, talking about interventions that have been successful. See, our experience shows that there is no one silver bullet. We need a combination of interventions or bundling of technical, social, and institutional interventions that are very context specific, based on a sound understanding of the local context and based on evidence. Unfortunately, that evidence is not enough, what we have today. And then, we are a technical organization, so to say, the CGIAR, but what we have realized quite a while ago is that access to technologies and other services is necessary, but it is not sufficient when we are talking about, empowering women and girls. We need to address the structural barriers women and girls face, and enhancing their agency is important so that we can, their adaptive capacity or resilience is enhanced. And we need to support them to become change agents. So some of these examples of programs, projects that I talked about, for example, when we talk about promoting climate smart agriculture, it was through engaging women's self-help groups in village climate management committees so that they have that agency and then engaged in that whole activity and driving that process rather than just being spectators of that process or just ordinary participants of that process. Capacity building, and then setting up women-led custom hiring centers so that the people, farmers, men and women farmers, smallholder vulnerable men and women farmers are able to rent in climate smart technologies at affordable rates. We are talking about machineries and implements and so on, which they cannot usually afford, and providing those climate information services. And what we have seen, the available evidence, again, which is not much, this is where we really need to focus in the coming years. As women and girls are equipped with new knowledge and skills and have access to agricultural information, they are able to discuss agricultural production with their husbands and their families, and are able to have a say in decision making on how to use additional income gained from that increased agricultural production, as well as on farming practices, on children's education, and a host of other things. The example of that participatory agro-advisory development that I mentioned, it actually resulted, this was an unintended outcome, but it happened. The agency of the women, we are talking about ethnic minorities here, increased, and it manifested in the form of public speaking, joint household decision making. We have evidence to show that these climate smart or stress tolerant crop varieties are helping women overcome the risks they face due to the increasing frequency and intensity of droughts, floods, submergence, salinity, and actually is protecting their incomes and food security. Evidence that some of the technologies have reduced women's work in very labor-intensive activities like weeding and water management and so on. Capacity development, no doubt, is one of the major interventions, and that seems to change. That whole human capital building actually instills a lot of confidence in the women, and that is helping them, go beyond what they have been doing and actually participating in community level action and establishing institutional links to drive change. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjita. So I'll move on to, and I think we just have 2 minutes and we wrap up this panel. So what does resilience look like from the examples both of you have been sharing with us, and how have you been able to measure it? Let's just take a minute or so, because we have interesting and very good questions from our audience. We want to take them up. Beatrice, do you want to, okay, Ranjita, I see you're ready. Maybe you can just.
Unless Beatrice wants to go first, but yeah. Several definitions of resilience. As I say, ability of an individual to resist, absorb, accommodate, recover from hazards and other status. But it's not just about bouncing back. It's about being able to work themselves out of poverty for the long haul. And in spite of any setbacks they might face in that process. Several indicators and tools have been and are being developed to measure resilience. IFAD has a multidimensional poverty assessment tool, which includes resilience as a component of that framework. Oxford developed a multidimensional approach, drawing on the work of the Africa Climate Change Resilience Alliance and the Alkire-Foster method. USAID has developed light, intermediate, and full approaches to measure resilience capacity. And that includes absorptive, adaptive, and transformative capacities. Mercy Corps identified 3 pathways that are critical for enhancing women's resilience. It's about decision-making, participation in community groups, access to market linkages, and our very own CGIAR's project level WEA, Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index, has indicators that reflect different aspects of adaptive capacity and well-being outcomes affected by shocks. But the dimensions that emerge as key from all these are social capital, that's really important, different types of social capital, bonding, bridging, linking, human capital, including knowledge, the diversity of livelihood and income sources, access to and control of assets, technologies, finance, insurance, and other services, safety nets, women's agency, access to markets. Yeah, those are, I think, the key dimensions that help us measure women's resilience. Thank you.
Great, great. We are spoiled for choice. And just to mention that the WEA that you mentioned, Women Empowerment in Agriculture Index, we just marked 10 years of its use last week. So that's also a great resource. Beatrice, let me give you this moment to share with us how resilience looks like and how to measure it. I guess I saved the best for last. Over to you.
All right. All right. Thank you so much, Vivian, once more. And so as an organization, as Friends of Nature, for us, we've actually been able to measure resilience from the young girls through their commitment to our programs and through them being able to identify certain challenges from their community and getting to say, hey, how can we tackle this issue and how can you help our community become better? And through their commitment, we've been able to see that they are willing to actually be engaged and willing to actually take up the lead. So that's how we've actually been able to identify the resilience. But also we've been able to identify resilience also through the incredible talents that they keep on showcasing. For example, they keep on doing some sort of artwork that shows that they have so much talent that if well invested, they will be able to become great leaders. And so that's how we've actually been able to measure resilience.
Great. That's why we are here, for you to help measure that exactly. So Dr. Ranjita Paskar and Ms. Beatrice Firi, thank you so much for joining us. I'll quickly move us on to the Q&A section where we have very interesting questions. And Dr. Dihan, the first question I'd like you to bring your way, where we have a question on the UN Committee for Food Security. And the question reads, what is most important for the UN Committee for Food Security to include in the new voluntary guidelines that are being negotiated? Over to you.
Thanks, Vivian. An interesting question and an important question, since these voluntary guidelines are hopefully will help countries also ensure gender equality and women's empowerment in their legislation as we move forward. I think very important in that is actually an understanding of the voice of women. I think that needs to be included much stronger. What do women want out of the food system? We always talk, and several people on this call have already mentioned it, or in this session have already mentioned it. We always assume, but we need to actually make sure we have systems in place that actually allow women to shape the future of our food systems. It's not us to decide, but it's us to help give that voice and understand that voice. Second, I do think that we need to be much more clearer in when is success? What does success look like? And that goes back a little bit to envisioning the future. How do we actually develop success? And so how can we work towards that? So actually having some better metrics on how we actually calculate and see success would be another way of looking at it. So those are just some initial thoughts from my side.
Great, very solid thoughts. Dr. Kalibata, are you with us? A question just came in for you, and we would like to bring that your way if you are in our midst. Maybe as we get her back, we can still check with probably, do we have Dr. Salimul? No. So maybe we can ask Ranjita or Beatrice. We also had a question that came in on in terms of access to climate smart technologies. Are women being incorporated? Probably Ranjita or Beatrice, one of you can weigh in on that as we try to get Dr. Kalibata.
Thanks, thanks, Vivian. So yeah, women, how do you, I think there was another question as well earlier. How do you ensure indigenous women are included? I think it is about that whole targeting what you use in your program and project strategies, being intentional about it. And then, I mean, I had never been a big believer in quotas when I started working, but I realized having some targets set, maybe not so much quotas, but targets, but meaningfully met, not just to tick the boxes and say, yes, we have reached X thousand women, but actually, engaging them in a meaningful manner. And so that you're not just reaching them, but you're actually benefiting and empowering them. So how do you design strategies? So are there enough climate smart technologies that have been developed for women, that are adapted for women? I say we still have long ways to go, but we are in the process of doing it, a bit of learning by doing, as Dr. Huck was saying. Unfortunately, not a lot of our technology development is gender responsive from the beginning. So as we learn and then, see what is important, and the most important thing to make that happen is engage women in that technology development as well, and make them hear their voices and let them guide that technology development. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ranjita, for that perspective. And allow me to move on because we have with us His Excellency Dr. Ngosa Simbiakula, who's Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary, Permanent Representative for the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Zambia to the UN. I will just bring him on to bring some remarks, and then we will go back to Dr. Dihan for some synthesis of this session. So a brief introduction to Your Excellency, whom I see looking sharp. Dr. Simbiakula has previously served as his country's ambassador to the United States since 2017. Beginning in 2011 until 2016, he held various cabinet positions, most recently Minister for Justice from 2015 to 2016. He also served as Minister for Home Affairs between 2013 and 2015. And he was the Dean of the Zambia Open University School of Law from 2010 to 2011. He holds a Doctor of Juridical Science degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, as well as a Master and Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of Zambia. So over to you, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Vivian, for a kind introduction. Excellencies, dear participants. It is a great honor for Zambia to co-host this event on the margins of the 66th session of the Commission on the Status of Women, together with the government of Bangladesh in partnership with CGIAR Gender Platform. So I want to thank my colleague, Ambassador Fatma, and Dr. Dehan, and the team at CGIAR Gender Platform. I would also like to take this opportunity to express our gratitude to all panelists for your insightful presentation. The information shared today will certainly go a long way in providing recommendations to policymakers on how to address the negative impacts of climate change, as well as offer practical solutions on how to build adaptive capacities for women and girls. Dear colleagues, the Zambian government remains committed to strengthening the institutional frameworks for implementing climate change intervention. Most recently, the Zambian government created the Ministry of Green Economy and Environment to champion issues of environmental sustainability in the country. There is no doubt that climate change poses challenges to government's efforts to combating poverty and reducing food insecurity. Zambia's dependency on rainfall in the agricultural sector has exposed our country to climate shocks, especially for rural households that tend to be more vulnerable to climate change impacts. In recent years, Zambia has experienced major crops declines, largely attributed to erratic rainfall. The Zambian government has consequently prioritized adaptation actions in the agriculture sector to respond to the adverse impacts of climate change. Although women are the bedrock of food security in rural communities, they are the ones hardest hit by climate shocks and food insecurity, attributed to persistent gaps in access to agricultural inputs and other productive resources, such as land and credit facilities. To build women's resilience to the negative impacts of climate change, the Zambian government is implementing various programs which are guided by various sectoral legislation and policies, including the Environment Management Act, the National Policy on Climate Change, and the National Adaptation Program of Action. In addition, the Zambian government has put in place a climate change gender action plan, whose objective is to ensure that climate change processes are gender responsive and guarantee women's access to information, participation, and ensuring that they benefit equally from adaptation and mitigation initiatives. We believe that this is particularly important for ensuring food security in the country, given the immense contribution of women in the agricultural sector. In addition, the Zambian government is implementing climate change adaptations projects, such as the pilot program on climate resilience, phase 2, whose overall objective is to strengthen institutional coordination at national level and improve the adaptive capacity of vulnerable communities. The project has been supporting vulnerable households with a sustainable livelihoods option to increase their resilience and response to climate change impacts. Priority is given to female-headed households for the project. Further, the government, through the implementation of programs such as the Farmers Input Support Program, has focused on distributing agricultural inputs that are suitable for the different agroecological conditions in the country. This has given farmers a wider choice of inputs to build climate resilience in areas where prolonged drought and dry spells are frequently experienced. Last but not the least, I wish to express gratitude to all the participants located in different parts of the world for joining us virtually today. Thank you once again for your active participation. I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency, for those remarks and for joining us today. Indeed, we had a wide array of speakers from Italy, the US, Uganda, India, Geneva. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And so since we are at the very tail end of this session, I will bring on Dr. Nicolene Dehan, the director of the CGIAR Gender Platform. She will give us a synthesis of what we have heard of today, and finally close this event. Over to you, Dr. Dehan.
Thanks, everyone. It started an hour and a half ago, but we've been on a whirlwind of information, of places, of knowledge that has been shared. So I really appreciate it. And I can't do a summary of everyone's work and everything we discussed, but I did want to highlight a few things that really spoke to me as we had this hour and a half with everyone online. First of all, very much action is now. There were several people who say, you know, we can't keep talking, we need to actually act. And we've seen examples of this and really appreciate all the work that's being done, but we need to continue. The other one that came up quite a few times, which is interesting and important, is education. This might be a little bit long-term, but we better start now if we really want to make a difference on climate change on that one, especially education in schools. But also, as was mentioned, for instance, human capital building, which is also very important as we move forward to building confidence. Another area that came up quite often was the technology and ability to access technology, and how do we actually work with technology to deal with climate change, and gender. And I think that's very important, and we need to keep on highlighting that. Going to scale was another one that was mentioned, like action now, going to scale. We talk a lot, we often do, you know, pilot studies, but we need to actually do it at bigger level. And developing a solution space. I like that word as well. How do we actually develop the ability to act now? These are just a few of what I was able to note. There was still so much more. I also realized that there were quite a lot of comments and questions in the chat. We don't want to lose all this information, so we as a gender platform will try to see if we can answer some of them or figure out how we can get answers to you. We do several things, like we develop explainers to explain certain agricultural and gender issues, but we also have top 10 reads, for instance. So to give you, if you want to know the top 10 of how to work on irrigation, for instance, and gender, we can provide that. So as we move forward. It rests me now to thank everyone, thank all the ambassadors, thank Bangladesh, thank Zambia. Really appreciate you're taking the time and you're willing to co-host this session, especially at the beginning of CSW. Really appreciate that. Also appreciate Dr. Agnes and Dr. Kalibata and Dr. Hook for taking the time to give us some inspirational words on how we need to move forward. I thank the panelists for all their input, for their bringing us down to ground again, and how important that is as well. So really appreciate that. I would like to thank also Vivian for her moderation. Always a pleasure to do it with you. She always brings a smile to everyone. I would also like to thank all the people behind the scenes, especially from Emerging Ag, BB and Robin, who've been instrumental in getting this up. But finally, and most foremost, I'd like to thank everyone who's been online. And I hope that we've inspired you. I hope that you, as you move into more discussions in CSW, that you do realize there's such a strong connection between agriculture, food systems, and gender, and also the strong connection that we do need to have more research, but that we do also need to move on ground and do things. Thanks again. Thanks for everyone online. Thanks for all your input, and appreciate you spending time with us this afternoon. Successful deliberations in CSW as we move forward. And who knows, maybe we'll see you again next year with a lot of solutions in that solution space. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye to everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.